Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Ken Samples, and we're going to be looking at the intellectual climate of the day. Ken, it's good to have you on the show.
Pleased to be with you, Jeff.
So, Ken, that term intellectual climate kind of is an odd term. Why don't you flesh out for us? What does that mean?
Yeah, the German, it comes from a German term meaning zeitgeist. The Germans have these kind of provocative words. Their word for worldview is Weltanschauung. And so philosophers kind of adopt some of the German thinking. But a zeitgeist means the spirit of the age or the spirit of the time. So it's essentially the idea that sometimes there are ideas that kind of deeply influence a particular climate. And so zeitgeist would ask, what kind of intellectual, moral, cultural, philosophical ideas are very popular at a given time?
There's a part of me where that seems odd because this intellectual climate kind of has this, it seems to imply a pursuit of truth. But if I understand what you're saying about the intellectual climate, that there's some subtlety or nuance to that. What are some of the ways, or what are some of those subtleties and nuance, and how do they play out?
Well, I think one way that philosophers have kind of looked at different eras, thinking of these very broad eras. So at given times and given places, a worldview would have a deep influence. We often think of Christianity in the ancient world kind of reflecting what we might call a pre-modern view, where there would be an emphasis upon truth, goodness, and beauty. So truth is objective. Human beings are able to grasp it. Then we kind of move through the Enlightenment era, which is more secular. They would say truth is discovered rather than in revelation from God. It's found in science. It's found in human reason. And then I think what we have during our particular time now, many people would call that a postmodern period, where there may be no objective truth, and therefore any kind of statements you make about truth are purely subjective and relativistic. And I think that probably does get a lot of play in our kind of world and in the media.
So this idea, yeah, it's interesting how you described the different views on truth. That in the Christian era, truth is through revelation, and the Enlightenment era, truth is through natural observation, natural theology, or studying the creation, if you will. And where now there's like this almost not even sure whether truth exists, or if it is it the same for everybody? How do you have an intellectual climate where, or what happens in an intellectual climate where truth isn't something that people can all agree on?
Well, that's part of, I think, the framework of this. Typically, Christians would talk about truth, goodness, and beauty. Those are objective things. Human beings are made in God's image. They can gravitate toward them. However, today, people may talk about a different. They may talk about a different framework. For example, today we talk about race, gender, and class. So the identity is different. Rather than the image of God, it's maybe your skin color, maybe your sex, or your social class. And even the ideas of truth. Some people would suggest today we live in a post-truth period, which means that we're highly relying more on our feelings, our opinions, or our personal experiences.
So how do you have education if there isn't some truth that everybody is agree on that we're pursuing?
I think that's a perfect question, Jeff, because I think we live at a time where there really is a difference between education, indoctrination, or even propaganda. Education, and I think you and I experienced that during our time of study, that's where you're taught a particular topic with the goal of you developing a critical, rational, and independent judgment of things. So my goal as a teacher of you is not to get you to think what I think or to tell you what I think. It's to give you the critical ideas so that you can develop an independent judgment. Well, that's education, but indoctrination is rather than teaching you how to think, I tell you what to think. And of course, propaganda would be the idea that I want to manipulate you. I don't care to get you to come up with your view. I want you to accept my view no matter what. And today, I mean, all you have to do is watch the news. There's lots of discussion about whether the leading universities in our country, whether they educate or indoctrinate or possibly propagandize their students.
Yeah, it does seem like the way education, or what is called education today, is very different than when I was in school, a number of years ago. I want to go back to your discussion, or you made a comment about objective reality versus subjective feelings. Flesh that out a little bit more. What were you talking about there?
Well, if we again think of those three eras, we might describe the very influential Christian era in the ancient and medieval world. Sometimes that's been described as the era of faith. Now it's not an irrational faith; it's kind of faith seeking understanding. But the Enlightenment, interestingly enough, was called the period of reason, the age of reason. Some people today would say that we live in the age of emotion, or the age of feelings. And again, we see a lot of this at the university campus, where people will say, I don't want you to present ideas to me that may threaten or maybe make me feel uncomfortable. Whereas I was always taught, and I think you were taught the same, that an education is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge you so that you can think critically and thoughtfully about the various issues. I think we probably do live in an age that's given much ideas in terms of emotion or feeling.
Yeah, I do. I find that a little bit worrisome, because part of what I've been taught is, you find the truth, you find the facts, you choose to believe the facts, and the feelings, you kind of want your feelings to adjust to reality instead of having your feelings define the reality of what you accept. That seems to play into kind of the last issue I want to talk about. You talking about explaining human depravity, just all of the problems that we have out there. How does the current intellectual climate deal with that?
Yeah, well, again, the idea of what is good. How should I live my life? What's right and wrong? Those issues, again, are thought of in very relativistic categories. But I would again propose the idea that it seems that human beings have a moral anchor within. I mean, the more I'm exposed to the idea that there is human trafficking in the world, where young girls, young boys are kidnapped and made to be sexual objects. I mean, I can't believe that something like that could be allowed. So even if there is a relativistic idea about good and bad, right or wrong, it seems that there are some things that hit virtually all of us as being wrong. So I think that indicates, Jeff, we live in a moral universe, and I would argue that moral universe is given to us by a moral God who expects justice.
Well, very good comments, Ken. I thank you and appreciate your involvement today. When we look out at today's society, we see that there's a very definite way that people look at things, a way that people want you to look at things. And what I love about what Ken was bringing to the table today is just realizing that we can look at the intellectual climate of today, and if we want to effectively engage our culture, we need to understand what that intellectual climate is. He's written a great article about this. Go to reasons.org and find his article. It's called Snapshot of Today's Intellectual Climate. It will give you some great tools and insight that allows you to bring the truth of the gospel into today's conversations in a way that people will want to know who God is and how they relate to him.